All right, the recording has started, and we can go ahead and start the meeting for today. Can I begin by gathering opens that people have?
Perhaps we can go over the health of CI in them last week, see if anybody has any concerns.
Okay.
And a second one is turning on Dependabot on EDK2 base tools repo.
All right. Is there anything else from anyone for opens? All right, it doesn't sound like it. I didn't see any notes from the last meeting, but is there anything that anyone recalls from the last meeting that we need to follow up on today? Or that you're waiting for, I guess, some conclusion to or anything like that? All right, if not, then it sounds like we might have a light agenda. Let's start with the health of CI since last week. Mike, I guess I'll let you lead into that one.
It's really just a question for, I know we've only got a few people here today, but if anybody's noticed anything from my perspective, it looks like it's running okay. But it's always the surprise if anybody's noticed anything unusual.
So I haven't seen anything unusual. I haven't honestly paid super close attention since our last series of kind of fixes and optimizations that went in. Um, Taking a quick look right now. I will say that, and I don't know if this has been the case on EDK2, but last week we had someone open some pull requests in our repos, and they were trying to dump secrets in the pipelines. Uh, so, kind of in response to that, we're going to strengthen our policy for people opening pull requests from external forks in terms of the pipelines and GitHub workflows that we run. Um, so that may be something to consider in EDK2 in the future as well. But I don't know if anything like that has happened recently or not. Doesn't look like it looking at the PRs.
I'm just curious, how long ago were some of those events that you're referring to?
This happened on Friday.
Okay, all right.
They basically rewrote a Python script and they replaced the contents of the script with something that would dump the environment variables and send a post to a remote server to dump the values of the variables. So it's not, I mean, this is relatively common. This is why we have things like secret variables and stuff like that.
Yep.
But at the same time, we're kind of changing our stance a little bit on the way that we treat these things from people outside the external collaborators, I guess you would say, in what's in GitHub, just to kind of require the approval for some of those things. So that's just something I thought I'd mention that um, may be something to consider in EDK2 if things like that come up.
Right, because there's like 3 levels of setting. So the first one is require approval of first-time contributors who are new to GitHub.
Yep.
The second level is require approval of first-time contributors, which means they can even be long-standing GitHub members, but the first time they come to our project, they require approval of one of our maintainers. And the last one is require approval of all outside collaborators, which would mean any external forks from somebody that's not part of our approved group would then require a click by a maintainer for every workflow run, right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Yep, we're gonna go with the last one, I think. Now the other thing that's interesting there is I'm not sure that policy applies towards pipelines. I think it only applies towards workflows. because the pipelines were triggering as a separate service, not necessarily a GitHub workflow. So that might require an additional change there.
Okay. Yeah, it does say workflows and not checks, right? It'd be
Right. Yeah.
if there's an equivalent setting for all checks that get run.
Yep.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, and I have read extensively the GitHub pages that talk about security and the dangers of supporting, pull requests from external forks. And yes, proper protection of your secrets is important, but even that can have some methods of trying to evaluate even those. So you have to be careful.
yeah, it gets a little tricky.
Yeah.
um, okay. Yeah, I thought I mentioned that. But it sounds like there's no concerns with EDK2 CI and stability there.
Okay. I think it is something definitely to keep monitoring. And if you see more attacks like that, let's bring that back for discussion here to see if there's anything else we want to do, especially
Yeah.
the difference between actions and pipelines.
Yeah, in this case, the person had created their account like I think 25 hours before this happened. So I'm assuming that they were aware that there was a 24-hour policy on a lot of repos, because that's generally what the new to GitHub thing goes off
Got it.
of,
Okay.
and they opened like 600 PRs at once. So I'm assuming that they had used like the GitHub CLI to just kind of
Yep.
automate a bunch of snippets that they were dropping in different places.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Yeah. And dumping the environment stuff is the go find somebody who's not done a good job on protecting their stuff in the first place. So
yep.
okay.
All right. Okay, so Dependabot and EDK2 base tools. That was
Yes.
our next topic.
Yeah, I noticed it's obviously active on EDK2 and our two PyTools repos, but it's not active on base tools. And I think base tools has its own pip requirements. So I think at least a minimum of the pip Dependabot checker would make sense in base tools.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm in favor of using Dependabot everywhere we can. So that sounds
Uh,
good to me.
Christine, any objections to turning on that feature in the EDK2 base tools repo?
Yes, I think maybe we can add a dependency and or just like the setup.python into the base tools repo. And I just encountered the developers asking me about the dependency of the base tools repo. Yeah.
Okay. Is that something you want to work on, Christine, or is it something you need some help with?
I think I can work on this.
Okay.
And in base tools, or do we take the Dependabot PR as is, or do people use it as a reference like we do in EDK2?
How do we have PyTools takes it immediately, right? It lets Dependabot do the commit.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. I'd leave it to Christine and Bob to decide how they want it configured for that repository.
Okay.
Okay, and I will sync with Bob. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Are you familiar with Dependabot, Christine?
I just see the PyTorch dependencies.
Okay. Yeah. I guess right. The question is, do you want to take the PRs directly created by Dependabot, or do you want to use that as like a reminder or something to inform you that there's an update, and then you create a separate patch yourself? Um, Whatever you want to do there.
I will discuss more with Bob, but from my side, I prefer the first one. Yeah.
Okay. All right. There was the issue that we had with turning on SMP and QEMU, and I think, Mike, you followed up with the QEMU developers about that. Do you know where we ended up on that?
Yeah, they're wanting to know how to reproduce the issue, so I owe them some more feedback there. I did do some additional evaluation on my own to kind of figure out where you know, what was happening and where it was going south. It actually appears that the firmware is completely alive and still running. It just starts running really slowly. And like the entire laptop runs slowly. So I think we've gotten into a scenario where the threads inside of QEMU have gotten into a state where they're maxed out and on execution time, and the actual emulation performance has dropped, you know, close to nothing and sometimes.
Hmm.
And it appears that the times it goes into that state is when it's going down a get variable, set variable call, and more likely so when it's actually updating the contents of the flash device, when it's actually writing the bytes through the flash model inside of QEMU. But it doesn't die, it doesn't hang, it doesn't crash, it just runs slow.
Okay.
And that's only when their multi-threaded tiny code generator feature is enabled. If you run the tiny code generator single-threaded, it doesn't do this behavior. And their description of that feature is the only difference between it is if you run the tiny code generator single-threaded, it means for the virtual CPUs that are being emulated, it does round-robin scheduling of the amongst that single thread of execution through that. When they go multi-threaded, it means they take some number of threads and spread them out across multiple, you know, however many vCPUs that, you know, they get a thread per, such that the tiny code generators are running in, you know, in unison with each other. So you can imagine, like, when we go into SMM, you know, with like 32 CPUs enabled, there's 32 CPUs, 32 threads in application space for QEMU, running the tiny code generator algorithms to convert the x86 macro code, you know, that's being emulated into an intermediate format that then gets converted into native code that can be run in application space is what happens there. It's a little translator there. They've got to accelerate their execution of QEMU, but that's now happening on multiple threads, all running in unison as they're interpreting the instructions from the guest environment. So it's a pretty complicated scenario, and as I said, I think it's got to be some, you know, probably unexpected, you know, spin lock, you know, a fight amongst the threads for coordination, and it's going into a max use of the CPU resources for periods of time.
Okay. And then you trace this back to like 2019 or 18 or something, I thought.
Yes, it was I traced it back to, there was a version of QEMU it did not show up in, and then one that it did right after that. And the significant change between those two is they added the multi-threaded tiny code generator feature. So it was basically running single-threaded before that, and then the next release, it was the multi-threaded tiny code generator was enabled by default, and then that's where it broke. And so then if you put it back into its single-threaded mode, it would then work.
Okay. So it sounds like it's been broken since multi-threaded TCG was added to QEMU. All right.
And it only reproduces if you have SMM enabled with SMM require, and you have multiple guest CPUs, like SMP, you know, 4, 8, and it more easily reproduces the greater number of CPUs. At 2 and 4, it can kind of work, you know, like as we saw. But if you go up to 8, 16, 32 CPUs, it always goes into this slow mode, especially by the time you get to our BDS entry.
Okay. All right. And I think right now we're just keeping it to one CPU in CI then.
Yeah, I asked Gerd if he wanted to provide a patch to enable multi-threaded with the single thread mode, which I think would be just fine. I don't think there'd be any issues with that, but I haven't seen any PRs from GERD yet on that.
Okay. All right, and then one of our other topics was Google Test. Is there any updates there that you'd like to share, or any?
It was merged
Issues?
last night,
Okay.
so it's in. It got all the required reviews. So so yeah, definitely, you know, keep doing the experiments with it, try it out, give feedback. We think it's right, but there's always a chance that as new use cases are tried, there may be some things that are not expected. So we'll just fix those as those use cases come up.
Okay. Is there, like, kind of on our long-standing topics, is there any updates or things we need to discuss related to EDK2 platforms or pull requests or anything like that?
So I don't see Isaac here. I think there's some conclusions on platforms that can be retired from EDK2 platforms, but we'll see if we can get Isaac here next week to give that final kind of direction, and maybe we can start getting some of those unsupported platforms removed.
Okay.
I'd like to see us trim things back, right? That's the first step, that we can figure out what to focus on from a CI enabling.
Yep. All right. I don't have any other topics.
I just wanted to ask a question of Annie, and that is, what are you gonna do when you get ready to drop one of these things? Are you gonna publish a list to the mailing list, or are we getting enough information here that should be enough?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of what you said. This was in regards to what topic?
Yeah, this is in regards to dropping platforms.
Oh, okay, and
Oh.
EDK2 platforms.
Okay, yeah, no,
Yeah,
good question. So yes, there'll be an announcement that the platform is still, since it's Git, the platform's still available in the history. So basically, you know, like the most recent stable tag time frame before they're removed, it's still there. So you can always go back in history and get access to the platforms. When you delete the files from the trunk of the Git repo, you know, they're not present there for the latest pulls you do, but the history is still there where those files were present.
yeah. So it's really not changing anything, right? They were nobody was maintaining them anyway. So
Right.
okay, all right.
But I absolutely do expect a full announcement of, here's what we're going to do, or here's the code review that removes those, so everybody can see it. And if they have a significant concern, then that to me is an opportunity for somebody to step up and maintain.
Yeah, I keep sending out internal mail going, okay, now if you care about this, you need to let me know, or you need to give me an engineer to support it. So
Right.
I haven't gotten anybody coming back going, yeah, we really want iSCSI, or you know, whatever the next one is.
Yep.
And what about CI and EDK2 platforms? Is anything happening there to enable that?
There was the objection that until we can, you know, turning on PRs without CI didn't make sense. So we have to figure out how to turn those on together. And Sean's biggest open is, who's going to monitor and maintain the CI and EDK2 platforms. We have to find kind of CI owners. To that, like, for example, like the events we had in EDK2 end of last week, those kinds of events occur once in a while. So you have to have some ownership responsibility for that.
Okay.
So until we solve that problem, it doesn't make sense to turn it on because if it breaks, nobody will fix it.
Are we looking for volunteers to do that at this point then? It sounds like.
Yes.
Okay. All right, it sounds like we've talked about all of our opens and the topics that come to mind that we've had recently. Is there anything else people would like to discuss today before we end the call? All right, doesn't sound like it. Well, then we'll stop here. Thanks for joining and have a good day.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye.
Thanks. Have a good one. Bye bye.